Okay, so okay, what are we going to do? This PPT or this chapter, which is a chapter from a book, is going to focus on this open just a little more. Why do not only nations but also people choose to be economically interdependent? Why do we say, okay, it's better to depend on each other as opposed to try to do it all alone? And actually, how? What is the mechanism? What is the way that trade actually makes everyone better off? And what does better off mean? Actually, you have more stuff, you have more value, you have more money, or you could just think you have more products than if you try to do it all yourself. Okay, and then within this, we're going to learn these concepts that are economics concepts that we're going to use going forward. So there's one thing called absolute advantage and one thing called comparative advantage. And what are these two things? And okay, so let's first of all, okay, so interdependence. So every day, every person, we rely on many people around the world, and mostly we've never met them. We don't know who they are for the goods and services. So if we look at this guy's talking on his phone, he's drinking his coffee, just a regular white guy. His cell phone came from Taiwan, his coffee came from Kenya, and his dress shirt was made in China, but he's in America, right? Mm-hmm. So suddenly his lifestyle, his happy-go business lifestyle requires all these different countries and all these different products from around the world. He has no idea who these people are, but that makes his lifestyle possible. And he bought his hair gel from a factory in Cleveland. Okay, so what is interdependence? So one of the principles of economics is that trade can make everyone better off. And so what does this mean? We're going to learn why we can gain this from trade. Okay, so let's look at two examples. So here's an example. We have the United States and Japan. In this case, we're only looking at these two goods. And again, remember, we talked about this. In economics, it's very good to get models that are very simple, right? Because obviously the world is very complex and there's tens of thousands of goods that countries trade back and forth with each other. But we can bring it down to just two goods to understand how this works and how countries are going to make decisions and how people are going to benefit. And I think the truth about life is you only make a decision, whatever decision you're making, if you feel it's going to help you in some way or benefit you in some way, right? Like before when we were talking about the opportunity cost, if you're going to make the decision, I'm going to hang out and play with my friends, or I'm going to study for my test tomorrow, those are two decisions you have to make. And you're going to hopefully make them rationally and say, okay, I know what my benefit will be, but I also know what I'm giving up. I know what my opportunity cost will be. And if I feel the benefit is greater, I'm going to do it, right? If I'm going to have more fun playing with my friends, I'm going to do it. Or if I'm going to get more sense of accomplishment, or it's going to help my future if I study for my test tomorrow, I'll do that, right? And so everyone is making decisions based on some kind of value or benefit that they can gain. And countries are going to do this the same way. Okay, so, and what we're looking at in this model is we're looking at labor. How many hours of labor does it cost to make computers and wheat in US and Japan? Okay, so let's think about how much they produce and consume. Okay, so if the country chooses to be self-sufficient, what does self-sufficient mean? I'm going to do everything myself. Or if you trade with another country, right? And those are kind of your two main choices. I'm going to just take care of myself, or I'm going to just make one product or mostly focus on one product and trade to another country. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So now we're going to look at again, this goes back to the last chapter, what you said, that production possibility, right? Because you always have a maximum amount of stuff you can make. And hopefully, if you're on the edge, what does that mean? You're being efficient. And what does efficient mean? You're putting all the resources you have into use. If you're inefficient, you're making less than the maximum amount you could make. And that means unemployment, that some either people or some factories or some land is unemployed. It's not being used. Okay, great. So in this model, the US has 50,000 hours of labor for production per month. So what does that mean? If you added the hours of work that workers would do for these two products, you have a total of 50,000 hours in a month. Okay, so if you put people working on computers, it would take 100 hours of labor. It takes 100 hours of work to make a computer in America in this model. If you wanted to produce 1 ton of wheat, it takes 10 hours of labor because you don't need so much workers. A lot of that is just time under the sun and you're using machines, right? Okay, so then we can think, okay, with this in mind, we could learn what is the maximum amount of all the different possibilities of making either wheat or computers. So we could put that out. So the US has enough labor to make 500 computers, right? But if they were making 500 computers, they're making 0 wheat. Or they have enough to make 5,000 tons of wheat. But if they're making 5,000 tons of wheat, they're making 0 computers. And of course, in this case, because this is just a one-to-one relationship, it's a straight line. Remember, we normally find that it's usually bowed out. But here we're going to say it's this straight line. And of course, there's all these different points along the way, right? Where you could make 4,000 computers or 4,000 tons of wheat and 100 computers, or any step along the line is doable, right?
Yeah.
And remember, they could also be somewhere in here, but that would be inefficient. You can see my mouse. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But if they're trying to be outside here, this is impossible, right? Because they just don't have enough people to do it. Okay, great. So without trade, what does that mean? We could use, or we, the US, I'm sorry, I'm American, so I can say we. The US could use half of its labor to produce each of two goods. So they could be like, okay, we're going to find this point right here, and we're going to make 2,500 tons of wheat and 250 computers, and we could be right here. Boom, right? That's one choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can derive Japan's PPF. So Japan, in this model, has 30,000 hours for production per month. Okay, producing one computer is 125, producing 1 ton is 25. So actually, wait a second. So Japan takes 125 hours and the US takes 100 hours. So what does that mean? Like when you're comparing these two countries?
It takes Japan longer to like.
Yeah, longer or more people. So really what we could say is that Japan is not as efficient as America in making computers in this model, right? And the same with wheat. Wheat, wow. Japan, they take 25 hours compared to America's 10. Now, why? Because maybe America has better machines or better know-how in this model, right? So the America is much more efficient, like, 2.5 times more efficient. Or you could say Japan is 2.5 times less efficient, right? Or, and here you'd say Japan is 25% less efficient, right? So in this case, America seems to be a little bit better at doing both of these two things, right? And so you think in your mind, okay, well, then if America's better, then they'll do it all. But that might not be the case. So let's see. So how would what would our graph look like? Well, of course, on our graph, we would put, we could choose computers or wheat on either side, but we might as well make it look like America. So on the left, we have wheat of tons. And then on the right, we'd have computers, or on the x-axis. And so the maximum could be 240 computers, right? Because that's based on how many hours they have. And the maximum could be 1,200 tons of wheat. That's the maximum amount the country of Japan can produce, right? And they would have this line. That's easy to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So without trade, Japan will do this, like they could choose this middle ground, right? Where they're making 120 computers and 600 tons of wheat. Okay, great. So now, without trade, what does that mean? U.S. consumers, so if there was no trade, if U.S. says we're going to just care about ourselves, Japan says we're just going to care about ourselves, what does that mean? There are 250 computers and 2,500 tons per wheat per month that U.S. people have access to, or U.S. consumers can buy. The same thing in Japan, but it's a much lower number because they're not as efficient and they have less worker hours. So they could get 120 computers and 600 tons of wheat. All clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now we're going to look, what is the situation if they decide to trade or if they don't decide to trade? Okay, great. So we know without trade, it will look like this above. So let's see how much is produced and traded. Okay, so suppose the U.S. produces 3,400 tons of wheat. How many computers would they be able to produce? So you don't have to draw this right now. We can do this here. And suppose Japan produces 240 computers. How many tons of wheat? Okay, so we can draw this. So here's the U.S., right? This is the same line that we saw before. So in that case, producing 3,400 tons of wheat is 34,000 hours, right?
Yeah.
And so then that means there's 160 hours for a computer. So this would just be finding this point on the graph. So imagine America chooses this point. Okay, great. And Japan, they produce 240 computers, and that would require all of their labor hours. So they would have no wheat. Damn, no noodles. What is Japan like with no noodles? That doesn't sound like the Japan I know. So that sounds like a terrible life. So, but they could make this choice, right? Okay, great. So this would be the situation. Okay, so now let's think about international trade. So you know this word called export, right? Exports are goods that we make in this country domestically and we sell abroad. And so the verb to export means to sell domestically produced goods abroad. So of course, countries will then sell what they make in their own country abroad. And imports is the opposite, right? Goods produced abroad and sold domestically that are sold in my country. So import is we purchase these goods that are produced in other countries. This is all okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. So let's say US exports 700 tons of wheat to Japan and imports 110 computers from Japan. So what does that mean? Japan will import 700 tons and export 110 computers, right? So they decided to do some trade. America's selling wheat to Japan. Japan is selling some computers to America. Okay. So then what we're going to see is how much of each of these goods is consumed in the US. And we're going to look at this. So, okay, so remember, this was the original American PPF, right? It could be 5,000 wheat or 500 computers. So what does that mean? Originally, they produced 160 computers and 160 wheat, right? But what did they do? They imported, America brought in 110 computers. They didn't bring in any wheat. But they exported, they got rid of, or they sold out 700 tons of wheat, but they didn't bring any in. So what does that mean? Actually, now Americans have 270 computers and 2,700 tons of wheat. And then we get this, wow, that's blue, right? This magic blue dot. Oh my God, what's so magic about this blue dot? Well, now, after America has made this deal, American consumers can go outside, or the American economy is moving outside its own production possibility frontier, right? And now usually we think, oh my God, that's impossible, right? You can't do that because you don't have enough people or you don't have enough machines to do that. But because of trade, now American consumers or the American consumers have access to more, which means what? If you have access to more, what does that mean? All things equal, you have a better quality of life, right? Like Americans are just better off because they can play more video games and they can eat more noodles. Ooh, that sounds like a good life, right? Just eat noodles and play video games. So this means that their life is better. And we can look at the same story from Japan. Japan's line, before, if they are only making computers and no wheat, well, they didn't have any wheat, which was a big problem. But they imported 700 wheat and they exported 110 computers. What does that mean? Actually, in the end, they're also a blue dot. They have 130 computers and 700 wheat. Oh, how cool is this? So now we have two countries with two blue dots. And what does that mean? Both countries are actually living a higher standard of living, right? Both countries are in a better place because they traded. Mm-hmm. And so this is a pretty easy concept to look at and understand using these numbers. But actually, it's a very powerful idea that suddenly these two countries have more money, have a better quality of life, have more value, right? And this is actually how trade works, is that when you trade, you're going to find that you're going to trade things that you're very good at. You're going to sell out things that you're very good at making or you're very efficient at making. You're going to bring in things you're less efficient. And what does that mean? Overall, your whole country is going to have more money, more happiness, more access to more things. And in this thinking, having more things equals being more happy. We're not thinking about like, oh, environmental damage or minimalism or all of these things. We're just thinking about, yay, if people have more stuff, they're going to have a happier life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what does that mean? Both countries are better off because they both have gains. So for the US, Actually, they have 20 more computers and 200 more tons of wheat. Wow, that's fantastic. They've got both, excess of both. And Japan, they have 10 more computers and 100 more tons of wheat. So they're better off. So both countries have a positive gain over what they could do themselves. But of course, you can imagine this is a simple model, and this is only two products. But they would know these countries would not stop here. They would then find third countries with other kinds of products that they could trade, right? And more and more and more and more trading is going to happen, and you're going to start having bigger and bigger gains. And then you can see how the world, and if you look at our world, if you think about our world right now, there's so much interdependence. There's so much trading, right? Where does your family shop for groceries? Do you go to like Trendian or Costco or Carrefour or where?
Like just Trendian.
Only Trendian. Wow.
Or Costco or like
okay, fine. So if you go to but when you go to Trendian, actually in Trendian, even though Trendian is a more like local store, it's no way it's only Taiwanese goods there. There's more Taiwanese goods, but you'll see apples that come from Chile or apples that come from America.
Like more of the Taiwanese good come from like the markets, right?
What'd you say?
Those like traditional markets.
Yeah. So if you go to a very traditional, like a wet market, like a Taisitang, then but not all. You think they are because everything looks so like local, right? But actually, when you go to a vegetable seller in the Taisitang, not all of those vegetables are made in Taiwan. Because Taiwan does not make every single vegetable. Most of them are, but some of them are still imported. Like in the wet market in the Taisitang, like a lot of times I saw like the asparagus comes from Thailand or some fruit will come from Japan or whatever, right? Like, they don't have so many signs that say where it comes from, but it's even there, it's still coming from different places. Because some stuff cannot even be made in Taiwan because of the climate or because Taiwan chooses not to make it. Or it can be cheaper to like the asparagus made in Thailand is cheaper than the asparagus grown in Taiwan. So there's still these kinds of things. So there's going to be less of that. Of course, if you go to Costco, is much more because a lot of that is American stuff, right? Or maybe not, Japanese stuff, Korean stuff as well. But you just see in our world right now, it's very globalized, right? And so these numbers that we see here, like, oh yeah, these two countries are gaining from this. It just keeps getting multiplied because every country is doing this, right? And then we're going to find out later, if you're doing this, you can get more and more efficient at the things that you do make. Why? Because, of course, like, do you play any musical instrument?
No.
Do you play any sports?
Yeah.
Which one?
Like volleyball.
Okay, great. Volleyball. That's cool. My brother's daughter is totally into volleyball. My niece, she's like 14. She's a volleyball head. So if you start to focus more and more of your time on volleyball and you don't touch other sports, what does that mean? You're going to get much better at volleyball, right? But if you say, oh, I'm going to play volleyball for one day a week and then tennis for another day a week and basketball for another day a week, you'll get better at all of them, but not at the same level, right? But if you put all your time into volleyball, you're going to start getting better and better. And then you start stacking those. And when it comes weeks and months go by, your volleyball style, your volleyball skills are going to really start to take off, right? Because it's kind of an additive process. Well, that's exactly the same if a country decides, like Taiwan. Right now, I guess one of the main reasons Taiwan can still exist, we don't get attacked by Dalu, is that we're so good at making chips here in Taiwan, right? So Taiwan has made sure it's got this important thing that they are much more efficient, much better than anyone else in the world. Like, so what does that mean? They're very valuable, the chips that they sell, because no one else can make the same chips. So they're very valuable. So that means they can trade and get money and use that money to buy the things that they are not focusing on, because you only have so much time or so many people to focus on things. And Taiwan is smart. They focus on these chips that are super important right now, right? Because everything uses chips. Everything in the world uses chips now. But what it means is that every country can start to get a little bit better and a little bit better at the thing that they focus on. And what does that mean? That these numbers can grow because you're doing more trading with different kinds of countries. And then suddenly you have a better lifestyle. And that's exactly the truth. Like, I'm sure if you ask your parents or your grandparents, say, oh, how was your life, your grandparents? How was your life when you were kids? They're like, damn, Taiwan was a poor country. Everyone ate you had two choices. You could eat di qua or di qua ye, and that's it. right? And now Taiwan is a very rich country and people live a very happy, full life. And a lot of that is because Taiwan developed, got very good at doing something, and they were able to trade with more countries and have more things. And then that means people have a more happy life or a more rich life, right? So this trade is this concept. It's very simple looking here, but it's actually a very powerful concept. And we've seen the world, especially in the last 50, 60 years, the world is getting much more tighter, and everyone is buying and selling everything to each other. These gains have helped many countries, even poor countries, right? Like we think like, oh, these poor African countries, they're just little kids with flies on their face or whatever. It's not really true anymore, right? Even these poor African countries that we thought were so terrible before, they're doing the same thing. They're focusing on what they can do, and they're trading, and their quality of life is improving. It's happening everywhere around the world.
Mm.
So this is a very powerful force in the world. Okay, so why? What the hell? Where do these gains? Why is it that America has these blue numbers that they can have even more computers than before, even more wheat than before? Even Japan can have more computers than before, more wheat than they could have actually made. So where does it come from? Number one, it could be that one country has an absolute advantage. So we know the word absolute. Absolute means 100%, right? So if you have a 100% advantage, what does that mean? The ability, you're able to produce a good using fewer inputs than someone else. And we saw that with America. America can make a computer in 100 hours of man hours, it was called in this model. Japan requires 125 man hours. So what does that mean? America's just got an advantage. They're using fewer inputs. And we heard this word input. Remember, input are those three things: land, labor, and capital. But America could actually just make the computers with less inputs. And then with wheat, same story. America only took 10 hours of man hours. Japan took 25 man hours. So America had this absolute advantage. They could just do it better. Maybe because they were luckier geographically, maybe because they had better technology, maybe because their workers had a better way of doing it. Whatever it is, they could do it better. So the US has an absolute advantage in wheat because it only uses 10 hours versus 25. And so if each country has an absolute advantage in one good, and then what does that mean? Exactly what I was just talking about Taiwan, about chips, and you specialize in that good, then both countries can gain, right? Because one country will say, I'm using my absolute advantage. I'm so good at this. I'm going to put my energy, my focus, my workers, and my land, labor, and capital into this. And you do that on the other side, and then we can trade, and we're both going to be better off.
Mm.
So which country has an absolute advantage in computers? Well, 125 hours in Japan, 100 in US. So actually, the US this is this weird situation where we saw, the US is actually better at both. 可是 there's still an advantage to do trade. So it's not like you don't even have to have an absolute advantage. So why does Japan specialize in computers? Why do both countries gain from trade? Okay, so the question is, in this case, Japan is like, actually they're better than both of us, but we should specialize in something. And Japan decided to specialize in computers because we can look at, now we're going to think about, remember, whenever we talk about goods, like when we looked at that PPF, you're always making a comparison, right? Everything is about the bijiao, like I'm making this comparison. So we can gain. Why? Because each country can specialize in the good that country can produce at the lowest cost. So even though maybe you don't have an advantage compared to the other country, when you look at two products, in this case, wheat and computers, you can still decide, I do one better than the other. And in this case, better means cheaper. I can make A cheaper than B, or I can make B cheaper than A. I should focus on the one I can make cheaper, because make cheaper, 代表, represents the fact that actually you can do it more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they're going to specialize in that. So what does that mean? Absolute advantage is the cost of good in terms of the inputs. But another thing is called, so now we're going to go back to this concept called opportunity cost, right? Cost is really, we need to understand opportunity cost means what are you giving up? So the opportunity cost of a computer is the amount of wheat that we could have used using the labor needed to produce one computer. So we can see the trade-off. In this case, we're only thinking about labor or man hours. So we can feel the trade-off. Making one computer costs how much in terms of making wheat, 1 ton of wheat. Okay, so let's see this idea. Now we're going to talk about this idea about comparative advantage. So before we said absolute advantage means you're just so much better in both or so much better at making this. But a comparative advantage means compared to the other, I have an advantage. So it means I can make one good at a lower opportunity cost than someone else. And if you can make something at a lower opportunity cost, not a total cost, but an opportunity cost, also you have this is called a comparative advantage. Okay, so let's see comparative advantage in computers. Okay, so now we can do the math and figure out this comparative advantage. Is this all making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's think about the opportunity cost of a computer in each country. So in America, one computer, the opportunity cost of one computer is 10 tons of wheat. Why? Because producing one computer requires 100 hours, right? And 100 hours could produce 10 tons of wheat, right? Because we remembered 10 hours equals 1 ton of wheat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we could say, okay, the opportunity cost of one computer is 10 tons of wheat. Like that's what it costs, right? If you're producing these two things. What about in Japan? In Japan, the opportunity cost of a computer is only 5 tons of wheat because one computer is 125 labor hours, but that could only produce 5 tons of wheat because remember, they're not very efficient at wheat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do I notice? 5 sounds lower than 10, right? So what does that mean? Japan has a comparative advantage in computers that actually for them, they can make computers at a cheaper cost in terms of wheat than America can make computers. So what is the main point here? Just because the other country has an absolute advantage, that doesn't mean you don't have a comparative advantage. You could still be 比较 more efficient at making this. And the 比较, the comparative, is what really matters. So what are you going to do? You're going to focus on what you are more efficient at making or what you have your comparative advantage. So when we think about what this, I just talked for a long time about this happy story about the world. The world is better off because we're making trade. And the reason why we're better off is because countries figure out what is their comparative advantage. So the gains come from comparative advantage, that we have these differences in opportunity costs. So then we can focus on the thing that we are relatively more efficient. Even if we're not totally more efficient, at least we're relatively more efficient, and that's all we need. So each country will specialize in the good. It has a comparative advantage. And what does that mean? The total production in all countries is higher because what you're doing is kind of like if you think about, I'm sure you're tired of this stupid question. Whenever you go talk to your aunties or your uncles or your older teachers, they're like, what do you want to do? What do you want to study in college? Or what job do you want to do when you grow up? Right? I'm sure you've heard this question a million times. And you're like, who the hell knows? But really, what is the right answer to that? The right answer for you and all your classmates is if you could go study the thing or go do the job that you're relatively better at, like it's more suits your talent, it more suits your creativity, it more suits the way you work, the way you think, you're all going to be happier, right? If your dad or mom forces you to do a job that you just really hate or you're just not good at, right? Like you said, you don't study any music, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if your mom is like, oh, the only way to have a 有气质 job is to be a piano teacher. So I want you to be a piano teacher. Probably you're going to be a pretty bad piano teacher, right? You right, Irene? Because you don't know piano. So you're like, damn, not many people are going to hire me as a piano teacher because I don't know piano, right? So that would be a terrible choice because you're not efficient at that at all. But if the thing that you really love, that you're really good at, or you get good at, you do that, you're going to do better and you're going to be able to produce a lot more, make a lot more money, right? And so really, we could look at this from every country doing the same thing. We could say, okay, if every country can figure out that thing that they're better at, then what's going to happen? It says the production will be higher. And what does that mean? The world's economic pie. And what does economic pie mean? It's just like all of the goods or all of the money we have in the world is bigger. And if the pie is bigger, we're going to cut it out. And of course, whenever there's pie, it's never shared exactly equally, right? If you look at the world right now, the rich countries like America and China and Japan and Germany, they get a lot more of the pie. They have a lot more money than the poor countries. But even the poor countries are better off now because the pie has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So everyone can gain. And everyone gain means the quality of life can improve everywhere.
Okay.
So this approves. This is saying individual producers, like a farmer and a rancher. Like a farmer is going to grow wheat, the rancher is going to grow cows, and or sheep or whatever meat he makes.